The Reds have endured an emotional rollercoaster of a campaign, but who has been their best performer? Liverpool's fate has been decided before the end of the 2023-24 season. The problem is what to make of it. There's no denying that the campaign now feels like an anti-climax, with the Reds surprisingly getting knocked out in the quarter-finals of both the FA Cup and Europa League, by Manchester United and Atalanta, respectively, before seeing their Premier League title bid collapse in April. However, it's worth remembering that not only did Liverpool win the Carabao Cup with kids, nobody even expected them to be challenging for a quadruple when the season began, given they'd overhauled their entire midfield last summer. And then there's the fact that Jurgen Klopp's decision to step down this summer took everybody by surprise back in January and completely changed the narrative for the remainder of the campaign. Looking at the bigger picture, then, it's been a positive season for the Reds, who are in decent shape for incoming coach onslaught. But who has been key to the revival? The 90-minute matchup evaluates and ranks Liverpool's 10 best players of their season. 10. Wataru Endo. Klopp knew the fans were underwhelmed by the arrival of Endo from Stuttgart after the failed pursuit of Moises Caicedo, but he promised them that the Japan international would prove a shrewd signing. The manager knew what he was talking about, because missing out on Caicedo proved a blessing in disguise, with Endo outperforming Chelsea's £115 million man in the Carabao Cup final. Unfortunately, the defensive midfielder ended up being overworked, as Klopp put it, and ran out of steam in the final few months of the season, but Klopp believes Endo will remain at Anfield for longer than anyone initially anticipated. 9. Diogo Jota. One cannot help but wonder where Liverpool would have ended up had Jota stayed fit for the whole season. Having already missed a significant chunk of the campaign with a muscular problem, the Portuguese caught fire around the turn of the year, before suffering a knee injury that robbed Klopp of his best finisher. Jota scored in his second outing after returning to action, to take his tally for the 2023-24 campaign to 15 goals from just 19 starts, but then suffered yet another setback. One can only hope that Jota puts his incessant injury issues behind him next season, but it feels unlikely. 8. Darwin Núñez. Núñez has undoubtedly made progress this season, but the unpredictable Uruguayan remains an enigma, a riddle that Klopp has never quite worked out. The striker started the season on the bench, but his game-changing double in the win at Newcastle kickstarted his campaign, and he eventually became Liverpool's first-choice number 9, thanks in no small part to him figuring out what Klopp wanted from him from a defensive perspective. At the end of the day, only Salah has been involved in more goals than Núñez, who has netted 18 times in all competitions, but doubts persist over his long-term future at Anfield because his finishing let him down time and time again during the most important part of the season. Consequently, while this was, overall, a positive campaign for Núñez, it's finishing on a negative note. 7. Conor Bradley. Just pips Kwanzaa for the right to be regarded as the revelation of Liverpool's season. After a very productive and successful loan spell at Bolton Wanderers, the Northern Ireland international did an incredible job filling in for Alexander-Arnold. A wonderful kid, a really hard worker, and a good footballer, Klopp enthused after the win at Bournemouth. He is a defender, but he can attack as well. No arguments there. Bradley has created 6 goals, and scored 1 himself. 6. Trent Alexander-Arnold. Liverpool's local hero has his critics in England, he probably always will. But he's once again proven himself an exceptional talent this season, drawing comparisons to Kevin De Bruyne from the likes of Gary Neville because of what he can do with the ball. It's, thus, easy to understand why Klopp has afforded Alexander-Arnold such freedom, or even just put him in midfield, when you see him picking up points for his team with sensational strikes, as he did at Manchester City and then again at home to Fulham. It was so frustrating, then, to see him suffer a knee injury at Burnley on February 10th that kept him out for 2 months. In spite of his absence, Alexander-Arnold still ranks second at Liverpool for chances created, 78, and successful crosses, 59, and fourth for possession won, 209, which just tells you how important he is to his hometown club. 5. Luis Diaz. Quite how Diaz managed to take to the field and score a precious late leveler at Luton, while his father was still being held captive in his native Colombia, is anyone's guess. The 27-year-old deserves all the credit in the world for the way in which he dealt with the shocking kidnapping ordeal. Of course, everything else obviously pales by comparison in such horrific circumstances, but it's been lovely to see Diaz back doing what he does best, driving defenders demented with his quick feet. He continues to frustrate with his final ball. 5 assists and just 7 successful crosses is a desperately poor return for a winger of such talent, but he's completed nearly 40 more dribbles than any other player at the club, and scored 13 goals in all competitions. Indeed, during the difficult finish to the season, Diaz was often Liverpool's most dangerous player. 4. Harvey Elliott. Harvey Elliott really came into his own during the second half of the season, turning in the kind of dynamic displays that suggest he will become more than just a super sub for Liverpool in the coming years. The versatile attacking midfielder was absolutely sensational in the league win over Luton in February, marking his 100th appearance for the club with a late goal before collapsing to the turf, exhausted, when the full-time whistle blew, which only made the 120 minutes he played against Chelsea 4 days later all the more impressive. Elliott also stepped up while others slumped during the last few weeks, most notably in the 4-2 win over Tottenham, with the Englishman creating 1 goal and the scoring an absolutely stunner to spark talk of a call-up to Gareth Southgate's squad for Euro 2024. 3. Mohamed Salah. It says everything about the incredibly high standard Mohamed Salah has set ever since he arrived at Anfield that this season can be classed as underwhelming, even though he's scored 25 goals and created a further 13. He is still Liverpool's talisman, and yet he came in for criticism during an unusually poor run of form when the Reds really needed him to step up, particularly after his unseemly sideline spat with Klopp. Ultimately, Salah's participation in the mid-season Africa Cup of Nations proved even more costly than the club feared, with the Egyptian picking up an injury in the Ivory Coast that he never really recovered from, but he's still been Liverpool's best attacker over the course of the entire campaign, during which he passed 200 goals for the club. 2. Virgil van Dijk. After an undeniably poor start to the Dutchman's reign as club captain, with Van Dijk getting himself sent off for the clumsiest of challenges against Newcastle before then talking himself into further trouble, there was chatter that the 32-year-old defender was in decline. As he said himself, "They thought I was finished." Turns out he wasn't, not by a long shot, with Van Dijk capping a remarkable revival by heading home the winner in the Carabao Cup final after yet another dominant display at the back. Obviously, as skipper, he must take his share of the blame for the defensive deficiencies that derailed the season, but, truth be told, Liverpool would have been lost without Van Dijk, who more aerial duels, 172, and made more interceptions, 46, and blocks than any of his teammates, 39. It was only right that he was shortlisted for the Premier League's Player of the Season award. 1. Alexis Mac Allister. Mac Allister always looked like a bargain buy, but his move from Brighton to Liverpool has gone even better than most people predicted. For starters, nobody expected him to spend such a significant chunk of the season playing in a deeper role, the Argentine included, and yet he proved himself one of the best number 6 in the Premier League. Then, when he was moved further forward thanks to the emergence of Endo as a fine alternative in front of the back four, Mac Allister flourished, producing a series of decisive displays that kept a lagging Liverpool in the title race until the end of April. Mac Allister ended up being involved in 13 goals in total, but it was his defensive contribution that really stood out. Nobody at Liverpool won possession on more occasions, 251, nor more tackles, 67, or duels, 253, while only Van Dijk made more than his 44 interceptions.